Okay. So thanks to everybody for joining us today on a really beautiful day. Um, I just want to acknowledge, first of all, that I live in the unceded ancestral and traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I expect that some of you are coming from other jurisdictions. Today, we're going to have a special talk because it's the first time we've had a talk in July or August in the summer months. And this is going to be by Kay Teschke. And I'm going to ask her to introduce herself and then carry on with her talk. I'm just going to change this to speaker view.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Paul. So as he mentioned, I'm Kay Teschke. I'm a professor emeritus from the School of Population and Public Health in the Faculty of Medicine, and mainly my work was on occupational health when I was working, although in the last 15 years I had a very strong subspecialty in bicycling safety, which is what I've continued with after retirement. And I just thought the land acknowledgement made me think of something that I've often wanted to say with these land acknowledgements, because I live right next to the Musqueam Reserve down by the river, and we have a residents association and have a little website for it. And when we were doing the website, one of the things we looked up was some of the history of the area. And of course, the reserve is really a small area. It's about 300 acres. And when people were originally shoved in there, it was about 1,000 people. And about the same time as they were forced into that small area, the British government was giving out land plots to British citizens, and they were 160 acres each. And of course, that's families like the McClearys where the golf course is now. So it's really a startling fact. And I thought I'd put that in with land acknowledgement and why we need to acknowledge the crazy things that we did way back when. Anyway, I'm not talking about that today. I'm talking about Newfoundland, and we went there in 2023, and it was the last province that my husband and I had ever been to. I've been to all the territories and all the provinces except Newfoundland, and part of the reason is it's just a bit more difficult to get to. There are two ferries that go from Sydney, Nova Scotia, one to Port au Basque and the other one to not Placentia. I've forgotten. Maybe one of you know. Anyway, in the south of the country, and there are three major airports to Newfoundland, and you can see them highlighted in my yellow dots here: Deer Lake, Gander, and St. John's. And we flew into Deer Lake. I came straight from Vancouver via Montreal on Air Canada, but my husband had been on a golf holiday in PEI. And so it was, it's almost straight north of Charlottetown to get to Deer Lake. But when we tried to book him on Air Canada, I was saying, okay, you fly from Moncton to Toronto or Montreal and then back to Deer Lake, which seemed crazy. So I looked up to see if there were any local airlines, and I found this one, PAL, which you can see the picture of the Dash 8 there. And he just went down an hour drive down to Moncton and then flew straight from Moncton to Deer Lake. And so if you're in the Maritimes and you need a more local flight, that's a really nice airline. And yeah. So Deer Lake, we decided to start on the relatively west side and eventually drive to St. John's, and then we flew home from St. John's. The blue dots are all the various places that we stayed overnight. And yeah. Oh dear. It's not letting me go. Aha. So I had a few hours to wait for my husband, so we took our rental car and drove around Deer Lake, and that was my first just, oh, you're kidding me. I had no idea. The wildflowers were just out of this world, just fields and fields of them. It was so beautiful. Yeah, I had this image in my mind of Newfoundland as this barren rock. Because of its moniker, the Rock. And this was the first of my education of no, it's not just a rock. Once my husband came, we drove to our first overnight stay, which was in the Gros Morne area. We stayed on the north side of Bon Bay in a place called Norris Point. And we drove along this road you see in red here, and the dot is approximately Norris Point. And this was the drive. So another view of this incredible green, full of wildflowers route. And of course, it reminded me so much of British Columbia because of these green mountains coming out of dark valleys and water and the clouds resting in amongst the mountains. It was so spectacular, just an amazing drive to get over there. The next morning we went down from our hotel in Norris Point down to Bon Bay, and here again you get that same picture. With Bon Bay is a fjord on the west coast, and what we're looking at here is from Norris Point across to a small town, another small town, actually a slightly bigger town called Woody Point. And again, the mountains and the cloud formations, just beautiful. And this actually reminded me not so much of BC, where we don't really have these villages along our fjords so much. It reminded me of Norway, and where this is a very common feature. And like Norway, of course, Newfoundland, most places were mainly accessible by water as opposed to by roads until much more recently. So this villages along the water is common here and, of course, in Scandinavia. And Norris Point has that feel of the old industry. There's still fishing going on and lots of evidence of, fishing boats, fishing traps, some you can see for hunting. And you can see my husband is just standing on the rock in the big picture, and there's a lot of scatter in the water just above him. And it turned out that we were there at the time of the Capelin run, and those are small smelts that are harvested for themselves. They're also, they are eaten by Atlantic cod and other fish, of course, whales and seabirds and seals as well. So they're really sort of one of the steps on the food chain. They eat plankton. So yeah, it was really fun to see them. We saw these like strange formations in the water all over the place. Is great. And Norris Point has another side to it too, which is a bit more of the modern side. You can see up in the upper left, the Bon Bay Marine Station has a small aquarium inside, but it's also mainly labs. And it's a field station for Memorial University for people working on ocean biology and so on. So that's really great. The other thing you can see in the big picture is what you see everywhere now in Newfoundland, and that is tourism. So you can see a group about to go out on kayaks, and Bon Bay would be wonderful. We did kayak, but we didn't do it here. But this would be an absolutely beautiful place to go kayaking. The next day, we did a short road trip slightly north. This was another fjord. So Western Brook Pond is a fjord, but this one is a landlocked one. So it's completely fresh water. It's also in Gros Morne Park. And there's about a 3-kilometer, very easy flat hike from the parking lot into Western Brook Pond, and we and most people take a boat ride to the end of the fjord. And you can take this boat ride and be dropped off or be picked up at the end if you're doing certain hikes in Gros Morne. So that would be very cool. This, of course, again reminded me of Norway. Lots of amazing rock formation and waterfalls, and just beautiful. My daughter is a rock climber, so I was really interested if they have a lot of rock climbing here. And the guys who took us on the boat ride said, no, it's really fragile rock and lots of rock falls, so people don't climb here. They were, and you can see in the middle picture at the bottom that they were great entertainers as well. They sang us songs all the way back. So that was our first taste of Newfoundland hospitality. Very fun. So then the following day, we drove all the way up the Northern Peninsula to St. Anthony, and there were lots of stops along the way. This is a fairly long drive. It's about 4 to 5 hours of driving. And because we stopped along the way, we took a full day. One of the places we stopped was this Lobster Cove Head Lighthouse. Most, maybe all of the lighthouses are like in BC, where they were automated in the 70s and 80s. So the light still works, but it's automated. And the keeper's house, which is right next to the bottom of the lighthouse, has been made into a museum. And that's been done at a number of different lighthouses across Newfoundland. We went into this one. It was fascinating stories of the life of a lighthouse keeper and the functions they've performed, and also what family life was. They're very isolated, of course. But this place was also surrounded with all sorts of trails, ones that went down to the water and through the forest. And you can see lots of more of the amazing wildflowers, including this bunchberry, which we have here. Another place that we hadn't planned to stop along the way up the coast was this. It's called Big East River, even though it's absolutely on the west coast. But it was a huge, we were driving across the bridge and I said, oh my God, look at all those fly fishermen. And so we stopped and talked to some of the guys. They were fishing for Atlantic salmon, and yeah, apparently it's fantastic fishing. And of course the setting is amazing. I just thought, wow, that's great. But of course I am so ignorant. I think of fishing in Newfoundland as being sea-based, boat-based sport and profession mainly, but here are all these local fishermen having a great time fly fishing. One of the classic spots to stop along the way up the coast is the Arches. This has been formed because the stone here is extremely porous. And so it's been carved out. This kind of stone rock is actually often holds oil and gas. And apparently there has been exploration in this vicinity because of these rocks. But to my knowledge, there has been no production anywhere here. And I'm not even sure if they found it, any oil and gas. Once again, wildflowers. In this case, this is cow parsnip with these giant leaves and flowers, and they're growing everywhere along the paths. Again, you know, another place to do some short hikes. And there were signs always saying, "Don't touch this. It's phototoxic and can burn your skin." So it was funny to me that they didn't get rid of it. They just they let it grow, but told you to be careful. So another classic stop on the way up the Northern Peninsula, and you know, just there's so many different, interesting rock formations in Newfoundland. So I understand why it was called the Rock, but it's amazing how different they all are and how interesting. So these are thrombolites, and they're only found in a few places in the world. And hopefully you can see by the few people that are in these pictures in the distance how huge they are. And they're actually calcified microfossils. So there's like microorganisms that have become calcified and form these very interesting formations, very kind of eerie looking. So I just wanted to mention a few other things that we saw on the way up the coast. This whole coast and also the northeast coast of Newfoundland have been sites of fishing by all sorts of fishermen for hundreds of years. And in particular, fishermen from Brittany and France came here for hundreds of years, starting in the 1500s. They created settlements starting in about the 1600s. And so this was called the French coast. There are a few places with French names, Porto Basque, and this is near Porto Choix, which is partly up the coast. And at Porto Choix, there's a museum, and there's also this outside stone oven, and we stopped there. They still make buns every day, and they serve them to you with some of the most wonderful preserves of Newfoundland, like partridge berry, which I absolutely loved. And after having them here, every time I had a chance to have them, I would have them. The two bottom outside pictures show some examples of very creative containers for household garbage. And there are so many different styles that people had, and it was very fun to see them. And then in the middle at the bottom are moose. And on our way up this peninsula, we came across moose on the road a few times. Moose were introduced to Newfoundland to be a meat source, and caribou have been in Newfoundland for much longer, but now the moose population has completely overtaken the caribou population. So it's fun to see the moose, but maybe not so fun for the caribou. So then here we are in St. Anthony, and St. Anthony, I haven't got a picture of the town, unfortunately, but one of the things in St. Anthony, like so many places, what you see in the upper right is the lighthouse. Once again, the lighthouse is automated now, and here, instead of the lighthouse keeper's house becoming a museum, it's actually a restaurant. And we had dinner there, and it was fun to be in a place like that. It was very much a locals dinner place. The picture of the lighthouse we took from the Cartreau Point Trail, so you can go up this a large hill or a small mountain up behind the town, and that was a super fun thing to do. Depending on the time of year, you might see icebergs, and we saw one far, far, far in the distance, but it was exciting for us because it was the first one that we saw. We also went to one of the bars there and helped with someone screeching in. So that's a popular bar activity in many places in Newfoundland. From St. Anthony, the classic place to visit is L'Anse-aux-Meadows. This was a Norse site that dates from about 1000 AD, and apparently was settled a little bit by about maybe 150 people for about 20 years. It was more of a way station, a place where boat repairs were done. It was being looked for actively by Norwegian archaeologists, and they were looking all over North America, and finally talking to some native people in Newfoundland, came across this site because there had been some oral history about it. and in the 1960s. And so it was excavated and then some recreation. And there is a big museum at this site. Anyway, it was very interesting to visit. They've done it well. But for me, another museum, which is in St. Anthony itself, was more interesting. I'm not sure if it's because of my health background or if, I'm not sure. But in any case, the Grenfell Museum. So Wilfrid Grenfell was an MD from Britain and also a missionary, and he was assigned to go to Newfoundland in 1892. And he traveled by sailboat along the northeast coast of Newfoundland and then up the northeast coast of Labrador. And this was really interesting to me because I'd always wondered, why the heck is Labrador part of Newfoundland and not Quebec? And this is clearly gave me an understanding of why that was so. Is this route along those northeast coasts was just the way that people got around for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, Native people as well as subsequently people from Britain and France and everywhere else, and Norway, everywhere else, is that route along that coast. Very, very connected. And you can see how close the Northern Peninsula is to the first stops on the Labrador coast. Anyway, what Grenfell saw horrified him. Poverty, desperation, incredible diseases that are easily taken care of. So he ran clinics all up the coast and realized that there was also need for a hospital. He started coming back year after year, training nurses and doctors to run other boats. Eventually built a hospital in St. Anthony for people who needed extra care. And one of the reasons people were so poverty-stricken is because fishing companies bought the catch from people who lived up these coasts. But before they went fishing every year, the fishing companies would sell them gear and supplies that they needed. And inevitably, when they bought the catch, it would never cover the costs that the fishing families had laid out to that company before the season began. So it was really indentured servitude. And so Grenfell also set up a kind of industrial system that allowed people in these towns to knit or make textiles or small furniture and so on, that they would then sell at the hospital and elsewhere around the world to give them some extra income beyond the dealings that they were having with the fishing company. Anyway, I thought this was just a really fascinating story and highly recommend it if you're ever in St. Anthony. Okay, so then we drove all the way back to Bombay, and in this case we drove to the south side, and I was really reluctant to do this because it's quite a long drive back to the south side of Bombay, but the travel agent that we had engaged said, "Oh, I really think that you'll like it, and I recommend it that you go." And so we ended up booking another night at a hotel in Woody Point. So yeah, we're now on the south side of Bombay, and you can see that it was a slightly bigger town. There were some bars and restaurants there, some small shops. There's clearly some bigger fishing vessels there, a little bit of boat building. It's an interesting little town. They have, sorry, let me just check my notes here. They have a summer concert and comedy series, and in August every year they have a writers' festival. I don't know if any of you listen to Peter Mansbridge's podcast, but if you do, you might have heard him mention last summer that he was invited to that Writers' Festival in Woody Point. And anyway, it's a lovely setting as usual. And yeah, we're glad to go there. I actually, at one of the pubs there, had the best fish and chips that I have ever had. So yeah. But the main reason that the travel agent said we should go to this area was this, which is just up behind Woody Point, called the Tablelands. So what you're seeing here is two very different geologies and landscapes. So on the right-hand side, green, the normal way that the hills and small mountains of Newfoundland look. And then on the left-hand side, something that looks much more barren and without vegetation. So this is one of the few places in the world where the mantle of the earth meets the surface. Normally, the crust of the earth is kilometers, tens of kilometers thick, and so covers the mantle and you don't see it. But here you see it. And every day there is a naturalist from Parks Canada who takes people on a guided walk through the Tablelands, and we went on this, and you can see, the walking path where it's delicate with a boardwalk, and eventually you make it to this, what you see in the upper right corner, this very, very barren land. It was a cool day elsewhere, but in this area, because the rock, of course, retains the heat for over days and months and weeks, and then it also reflects the heat. It was so hot there. A lot of us went down to the creek that was running through and wet everything we could, including our clothes, just to get cooled down. But one of the characteristics of the Tablelands is because the rock is non-carbonaceous and there's really no carbon in the soil, or in the rock really, that very little vegetation grows. And of course, that also means that
It's a girl.
It also means that no new soil gets created. But you can see down at the bottom two carnivorous plants, so a flycatcher and a pitcher plant, and both of those are very common in this area because they just get their carbon nutrients from the insects. So that was surprising and a cool element of the Tablelands. Okay, so the next day we drove across to Twillingate. So we passed a lot all the way over there. Twillingate is on a series of islands and accessed by bridges. It's also very close to a quite famous island now for tourists called Fogo Island, which is a very rocky island and you have to access by boat. We didn't go there. Wanted more to be in a place that was lived in by Newfoundlanders. And so, yeah, we went to Twillingate. Because of the whole area is full of islands and coastal inlets and so on, it was interesting to drive through on the way there because it really had, to me, I grew up in Ontario, and so it really seemed like cottage country in Ontario. Of course, the cottages are on the water, but it had that kind of lots of trees and small bays. It really had that feel to me. So it was really lovely. This is some scenes from around Twillingate. The town itself is a few thousand people, so you're not seeing that. So some lovely cottages more on the seaside, on the open sea, because Twillingate's more close to the open sea, not like the the bays that we passed on the way in. And you can see that people still have all these boat houses that they use for parking their more recreational fishing boats and so on. So that's cool. There's a lighthouse there, again, automated, but this one has a museum beside it. And here at Twillingate is where we started to see very close up icebergs. And here is the one that just took our breath away. This is a photo from the shore, so close and of course massive. But the locals whose backyards we were standing in to have a look, us and a few other dozen tourists, they said that it had just broken in two. It was about a kilometer long and now is only about maybe 400 meters long, but only. Anyway, we thought it was just incredible. We also took a tour out to get to some other icebergs further out. It was a great iceberg season, apparently. The guys who ran the boat were terrific, and they picked up pieces of the iceberg. They wanted to show us how porous it was. You can see that in the lower left picture. You can see all the air bubbles, and those bubbles are what give the iceberg this white color. And it also gives, as it melts, all those little air bubbles are opening up. And so you hear this hissing sound when you get close to the iceberg. But in the middle picture, you can get another view of the iceberg. And you can see in the middle, there's almost a clear piece of the iceberg. And that's where there aren't so many bubbles, or maybe none, where it's much denser and it makes it clear. And here you can see how that density looks on a grander scale. It turns that incredible blue. So you see these blue stripes in the icebergs. And well, you can just see all the different forms and so on that we saw. It was amazing, just so much fun to see all these different shapes, and it was a really terrific tour. We also, this is where we did a kayak trip, and it was a sunset trip, and we saw, beautiful sunset. It was very nice. We also had imagined that we'd be able to get even closer to the icebergs in the kayaks. Of course, because kayaks are so great at getting close to shore and so on, but we were quickly disabused of this idea because icebergs do break up, like the giant one that I showed you earlier. And when they do, they can flip over and do all sorts of crazy things, and of course can easily flip a kayak. And of course, if you're paddling, you can't get away very quickly, whereas at least in a motorboat, you have a chance of exiting the scene much more quickly. Also, as we were leaving Twillingate, we stopped at this lovely museum. It's just a private museum created by a man whose dad was a fisherman, and so when the cod moratorium went in place, he just collected as much stuff as he could, and he created this really fantastic museum with lots of stories about fishing life. They had a wonderful collection of books written by Newfoundlanders about all sorts of different elements of Newfoundland history, and we bought a couple of them and just love them so much. So it was great. We also went to another small museum in Twillingate proper. It was a wooden boat museum, and told the story of different types of sail systems. And I really got a kick out of the small museums in Newfoundland. I'm the kind of person, I like museums, but a big museum I find hard because there's so many exhibits, and I can't tolerate looking at exhibit after exhibit for hours at a time. So these museums, usually you could spend an hour and a half and get a ton of information and go off and do something else in the day. And I found that really great. Okay, so then the next day we drove from Twillingate to Bonavista, and we stopped in Gander along the way. And this is one of the reasons why. So we went to another small museum, the North Atlantic Aviation Museum in Gander, and it tells the story of the history of the airport and aviation in Gander. So there are really three eras, and it covers them all. It was originally an American and Canadian air base in World War II. So that was when the runways were created and paved. And during the war, the fighter jets and bombers that were built in North America were ferried from here. So they would stop in Newfoundland and refuel and head over mainly to Britain. There were over 20,000 planes that went this way to join the war effort. In the post-war period, planes were the same as these military aircraft. If you wanted to do a transatlantic flight, you wouldn't have enough fuel without stopping partway there. And Gander was the stopping place for transatlantic flights both ways. And that went on until the 60s, when jet engines became more popular or more used than propeller planes. After this being a stopping place, it was still a major air traffic control, and still is a major air traffic control center for transatlantic flights. So even though planes aren't stopping there, it's a guidance point for pilots on their way to and from Europe. And of course, because of that, and because it was a convenient, little used airport, in 9/11, this was a huge stopping place. And one of the coolest thing in this museum is the radar screens, both before the recall or the grounding of all the planes. So you see the radar screens with planes going every which way that the air traffic controllers would have seen. And then the order went out to ground planes. So the air traffic controllers in Gander were the ones who redirected people to Gander, but also to other airports all around the eastern seaboard. And you can see when they put out the order that you see these little dots, which were going every which way, all of a sudden heading towards Gander. Anyway, I thought it was wonderful. And then we also went to the airport itself. It's an amazing airport done in mid-century modern style, these wonderful terrazzo floors, mid-century modern furniture, sculptures, the mural. It's just wonderful. And here, there's a bit of this in the museum as well, but also here at the airport, there's a section up on a mezzanine where the bar for the airport used to be. And it tells the story of all these different famous people whose flights touched down on the way to or from Europe. And you can see this incredible list of people. And of course, it was wealthy people who flew in those days. And so it was really a big deal. And what the local people in Gander would do is they would go and sit down at the bar and chat with the people who were coming through on their flights. And there's a story about one of the women was chatting with this lovely man, and then when he left, someone said, "Did you know that was the King of Denmark?" And so such a great story. Another story was when Muhammad Ali was passing through, the people who were at the bar immediately phoned everyone they knew, and a kind of telephone chain went out, and all of a sudden there were thousands of people at the airport wanting to see Muhammad Ali. So yeah, it must have been so great. Okay, so after we finished in Gander, we headed over to our bed and breakfast on the Bonavista Peninsula, and it was this wonderful place called the Fisher's Loft Inn. It was my favorite hotel bed and breakfast to stay in. It's got several buildings. You can have a small conference there. Beautiful buildings. They have breakfast in one of the buildings. They have a lovely garden there where they get most of the produce. They serve dinner, a set menu dinner there. We could only manage one reservation for dinner, but it was excellent. So the cooking is fantastic. And the gardens are fantastic. And the rooms, both the bedrooms in the hotel and all the common rooms in the hotel, have a series of local Newfoundland art. And that was really fun to see. And you can see in the bottom right a trail that's just starting. And that's the start to this wonderful trail called the Skirwink Trail, which goes around the whole peninsula that the Fisher's Loft Inn is on. And the landscapes that you see, I mean, so varied. It was amazing. These incredible rock formations and meadows and vistas of bays and forest. It was, we just loved that hike. My sister went to visit this year, and she said she went around the hike a couple of times. She loved it so much. So it really, really great to be able to walk out your door to such a wonderful hike. Further up the peninsula, we did a drive one day to Elliston, and Elliston is probably the most famous because it has some puffin nesting sites, both on the mainland and on some rocks just off the coast. There are tons of photographers with big long lenses taking photos, but I got a kick of this fellow in the middle with his paints instead. So he was the only one I saw painting. Elliston is also very well known because it has root cellars, apparently over 100 root cellars in the area, and you can take a peek in some that are empty and no longer used. Elliston also has one of these wonderful small museums, and this one is about the sealing industry. And I know many of you are probably like me, of the generation where the horror of sealing and killing all these baby seals was top of mind. And I never really thought much about the people who did the sealing, but this museum tells their story. It turns out that sealing was another one of these ways that fishermen who were indentured to the fishing companies could make some money that they could really own, really pocket. So it was a big excitement to be able to go on a sealing vessel and actually be able to make some money and try to not be desperately poor for a year. But it shows some movies of people walking on the ice floes, and I, being totally ignorant, had no idea of how these ice floes are moving up and down with the swell of the sea and the treachery, how treacherous that was. Just incredible. And the museum also has the story of this terrible disaster when a lot of men died, and that's the mural that you see in the upper left hand. There's a couple of books that were written about it, and we bought both of them, and really a very interesting story and very sad, like lots of Newfoundland life. One of the most famous things on the Bonavista Peninsula is at the town of Trinity, which is one of the many, many, many fishing towns that was devastated by the cod moratorium. And in 1978, a very creative group of people decided they would create a theater there called the Rising Tide Theater. It opened in 78. And their most famous production is most afternoons. It's called The Pageant, and it involves the actors going to different places in the town and telling the story of the town from these different locations. So the audience moves with the actors around the town, which I think is a terrific way to do a play. And it was really fun to do that. But they also have productions in some small theaters, and we also went to one of those, and I can attest that they also tend to tell stories of the history of Newfoundland, and we really loved the one that we went to. Our final stop was in St. John. So we drove from Fisher's Loft Inn to St. John's. And along the way, we stopped at some of the coves along the peninsula that St. John's is on. And one of those turns out to have been the place that Terry Fox started his cross-country run. The statue that you see in the upper right is the statue of Terry Fox that sits in St. John's itself, but his starting place was actually not quite there, or was not there. It was north of town. You can see again the idea of the fishing in this area. This is St. John's itself, and this is a picture from Signal Hill. To the left is the entrance from the Atlantic into the harbor in the middle. It's an incredibly well protected harbor, a very narrow entranceway. Such a great thing when you're on an incredibly stormy ocean. And yeah, you can see a variety of ships in the port. There's still fishing vessels. There's also vessels that service the oil rigs. And of course, the Titan, that submarine that imploded on the way to see the Titanic, was also housed over winter in St. John's Harbor. There is a museum up on Signal Hill. You can just kind of see it. Let me see here, right here. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but sort of in the middle of the right-hand side of the picture. And in that museum, my favorite exhibit was about the offshore oil and gas industry, and it told the tale of the Ocean Ranger, which collapsed in 1982. So yet another very sad industry with terrible occupational fatalities in Newfoundland. But the museum has the story of what they've done since and the technology that they've invented locally that has been taken up around the world. So it's a great engineering story as well. This is the rooms. So this is behind the harbor, and you can see the direction you're looking from the rooms. The rooms is the big provincial museum and art gallery. I was really impressed at how amazing it was. It has a great restaurant, great art galleries, great cultural and natural history galleries, and a really incredible building with a great vista over the city. And I was impressed with what a wonderful museum it was for a province with 500,000 people, when in BC, our Royal BC Museum definitely needs updating and something a little bit more architecturally interesting. But even in a province with over 10 times the population, we can't seem to do it. More pictures from around St. John's, colorful homes that you see on the side of the harbor. Of course, these homes are much bigger than they would have been. You can see some of the oil rig vessels down on the bottom right. And then I wanted to show you this, Bannerman Park, which is something that I'd never known about, but this is just on the interior of St. John's, and a beautiful park. It was created in the Victorian era. It's used for all sorts of things. We saw lots of kids playing there. It looked like summer camps. There's music festivals there. And it's completely surrounded by these beautiful, beautiful Victorian homes. And of course, why not? These are the homes that were built by the owners of all those fishing companies that tormented the people in the villages and towns that we went through earlier. They are beautiful homes, and some of them are bed and breakfasts now. We stayed just slightly out of town in a small section called Kitty Vitty. It's also another little small harbor just north of the main St. John's Harbor. A lovely neighborhood. It has an old fishing an old fishing loft that has been made into a place where craftspeople sell their wares. So that was nice. There's a lovely restaurant there and a lovely hotel. It was a little bit expensive, but we enjoyed it. And Kitty Vitty Lake is very close, and we could walk along Kitty Vitty Lake into the main part of St. John. And we almost always saw people practicing rowing, and it turns out there is often a big rowing regatta here over the years. And that is our trip to Newfoundland. And this is us flying out. And I wanted to just give a shout out to the travel agent that we booked through with this very funny name, Maxim Vacations. They are based in St. John's. They know the province so well, and they make such great suggestions to us. I really wanted to let you know that we use them. And it turned out that because we didn't have to pay the car return fee for having a different drop-off point than where we picked it up, that made the trip as cheap going through the travel agent as it would have been if we'd booked it all ourselves, and we would have had to pay that extra fee, which would have been a lot of money. So that's a useful thing. I also want to give a shout out to two of my colleagues, Chris Van Netten and Eva Hilliard, who went to Newfoundland before us and really gave us lots of great hints as well. So that is my talk.
And thank you very much, Kay. And perhaps you could stop sharing and we'll have a look at everybody and see if people have any comments or questions. I'll put the view up to gallery. That was a wonderful trip. And could you tell us what time of year did you visit? When did you visit?
It was July, so it was in the middle of the summer, and our friends who I mentioned went in May. I mean, they have family there, so they just went to visit family for a certain occasion, and it was definitely, their photos showed that it was a lot more rainy weather. Honestly, I think we had maybe one day where it was a little windy and on and off rain, and that was going up the Northern Peninsula. But overall, we had just lovely weather. So now, if you're going to see icebergs, that's something you need to time a little bit. So earlier, of course, is better for icebergs, but we were there for an amazing iceberg season.
Any comments or questions for Kay? Anyone? Ken?
I can't hear you.
Ken, you can unmute yourself now.
A couple of decades ago, I was involved with the Canadian Red Cross Society first aid program, and we would have meetings in the provinces across country. And so I did go to Newfoundland for one of these meetings, and we drove out of St. John's to Grand Falls for the meeting, and had our meeting, and then couldn't find any accommodation in Grand Falls. So we had to turn around and drive all the way back to St. John's in order to find a place to sleep for the night. It was an exhausting day, but what a beautiful place it is, the rock and the trees and the great lobster. You didn't rave enough about the great lobster.
Yeah. No, we had all sorts of seafood, but the truth is we didn't have any lobster. I can't
Oh
remember.
no.
That seems so strange. Yet we ate seafood virtually every night. It was so great. But yeah, when we were traveling in PEI in Nova Scotia, we had lobster a ton of times, but maybe that we were just not looking for lobster this trip. I mean, there was all sorts of great seafood on offer. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting about you're having trouble with hotels. I mean, was that just because there were so many people for the
Yeah, they were all booked. They were fully
yeah.
booked. We had assumed we would find something, and we couldn't.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know for sure, but tourism is definitely a huge industry there now. And maybe there are more hotels than there used to be, but I'm not sure.
Dan Goldowitz.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much, Kay. That was wonderful. It brought back a lot of wonderful memories we had about a decade ago. I think we took the boat from North Sydney to Argentia, I think.
Yes.
And we circled the rock, I guess you'd say. And the highlight of our trip, other than when we arrived at night, the moose were all over. I was trying to drive, and my son and my wife were just commenting on mooses to the right of us and to the left of us. It was scaring the shit out of me. But the highlight of our trip was what you showed, the Skirwing Trail. That was an amazing trip, about 5 kilometers around, and the rock formations off of the walk were just really spectacular. So thank you very much for sharing it.
Don, and then someone who, Marla. After.
Yeah, Lorna and I were there in 2007 when my choir was participating in the Festival 500 Choir Festival. So we took a road trip afterwards, and one of our stops was Trinity, where we saw a play, which was a precursor to Come From Away. And of course, it was right so close to Gander that was like, a stone's throw virtually away from where all this happened. It was just an incredible play. And the theater probably sat 50 people. It was just what a very intimate setting. It was just fantastic. And our road trip was great.
That's wonderful.
I have to say about that play, I wrote to the
Rising
Tide Theater to say, has your play been stolen and has it been changed? And they never replied because we were just so moved to tears. That's me. It was just a wonderful play.
That's great. I wonder if they did, change it and write it for Come From Away. I wouldn't be surprised. Those folks are so creative.
Yeah.
Okay, Marla.
Unmute.
You need to unmute.
Can't hear you.
Unmute first.
Okay,
Yes.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It felt like I was there with you, and thank you so much for making it so, like a firsthand experience. I've been there twice, and I just felt like each time I left part of my heart behind, I guess you say it. Yeah, but one time my dad met me there many moons ago, and he wanted to just join me after the conference for some, like similar to the traveling that you did. So we got to, I think it was Trinity, when where my colleague and I had a reservation, but for accommodation, but he didn't. But the owner of the B&B where my colleague and I were staying said, "Oh, no problem. You can go and stay with my mom."
Oh,
And
fantastic.
he had the best evening he probably ever had. They were going to do it anyway, a kitchen party and, with the late nights and all the instruments, just spontaneous, and he just enjoyed it so much. And we did have lobster, and we just, it was just something really touching about the people and the land. Although, I've just read several of Wayne Johnson's, I think Johnson or Johnston's books. And, he presents a very different side of it, in terms of the poverty and the, what you're referring to with the abuse by the big fishing companies of the people. And it's, very disturbing and dark.
Yeah.
But I think that, that era is not over, but it's certainly not in people's minds and hearts who are still living. But it's like you said, with tourism, they've opened up to the world, and the world is really embracing them.
Yeah, it's sort of it's nice that they have the museums that help us remember.
So
Yeah.
Helen and then Tony. Helen.
Yeah, hi. I really enjoy your talk. Some years ago, my wife and I took a self-guided tour across Newfoundland, but in the opposite direction. We flew to St. John's, went through all the places you mentioned, including St. Anthony's and the hospital there. And to us, the main impression, the biggest impact was seeing the icebergs and the whale watching and eating the lobster feast. It was amazing. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony. Helen?
Thank you very much, Kay. Your photographs are lovely. It brought back wonderful memories of our trip to Newfoundland. But my most vivid memory, I think, is how friendly the people were. You'd pass the time of day, and half an hour later, you knew all their history, and they knew most of yours. And it was so heartwarming. It was lovely. So thank you.
I agree. Totally true. I'm glad to hear how many people have been to Newfoundland, because I sometimes think it is neglected. And it's funny, my younger sister has had a number of business meetings in St. John's, and she never went and toured the rest of Newfoundland at all. And so when I was sending her some pictures as we were traveling, she said, "Oh," she was just amazed that the rest of Newfoundland was as great as it was, because she had never wanted to venture farther. So Newfoundland is now on her plans for a return visit. But it seems like most of you have been more adventuresome when you've gone to conferences and so on.
Any other
It
comments?
was a very, it was a very inspiring talk, and it makes me want to go. I have a friend who was a former postdoc of my husband, who was head of chemistry at the university there, and your talk makes me want to go visit. So thank you very much.
Oh, that's good.
Ken again?
Again, decades ago, my dad happened to be at a meeting in St. John's while I was there, and we went down to the docks and spoke to a fisherman. He took us out on the boat, and we went for cod and caught some cod and took it back to the hotel, and the chef cooked it up for our dinner that evening. It was quite a special feast.
Wow, fantastic.
You know, it reminds me, it wasn't Newfoundland, it was in Peggy's Cove in Nova Scotia, the year after the man first landed on the moon. And I was there in the summer, and it was freezing cold, and people were selling these lobsters on the dock. And I walked by, and there was two older guys sitting by a shed, and they asked me where I was from. I had come from Toronto at the time. And he looked at me and he said, "Tell me, do you believe that man actually walked on the moon?" And I said, "Well, didn't you see it on TV?" He said, "Yes, but I don't know if to believe it." And I said, "Yeah, it's true." He said, "Maybe that's why the weather is so bad now, because it disturbed everything." So then I changed the subject and I said, "You know, I'd love to be able to get some lobsters at the dock and have them cooked up." He says, "No problem, go get 2 lobsters." Took them back there. He took me up to his house. He cooked up the lobsters, and we sat there, and the two of us had lobsters. No, very friendly guy, simple.
Wow. Oh, you guys have some fantastic stories.
Anyhow, again, Kate, thank you so much for the talk. I'm so pleased that we fitted it in this year, and we had a good participation. There were almost 30 people here, which is not that much different from my usual talk. So I'm happy that we did this. Now we're going to break for the summer, and we start back in September, and we already have September, October, November scheduled. And I think in September, Peter Wing and Claire Weeks are going to talk about a trip that they did recently to the south part of India and to Sri Lanka. So we look forward to that. Enjoy the rest of the summer. And thanks everybody for attending, and thanks particularly to Kate.
Thank you for attending on such a beautiful day. Bye, everyone.
Lovely.